how did life change when your father decided to run for president?
Wow, everything changed. You know, almost overnight, we learned that he was planning to announce his candidacy 2 weeks before he actually did. And nothing about our lives had been constructed with politics in mind. Most often when people are exposed to politics at that level, that sort of national level, there's first like city council run, and then maybe a state level run, and maybe Congress, senator, ultimately the presidency. So it was unheard of for him never to have run a campaign and then run for president and win. So it was an extraordinary experience. There was so much intensity and so much scrutiny and so much noise. So that took, for sure, like a moment to acclimate to. I'm not sure I ever fully acclimated, but it definitely was a super unusual experience. But I think then the process that unfolded over the next couple of years was also like the most extraordinary growth experience of my life. Suddenly I was going into communities that I probably never would have been to. And I was talking with people who in 30 seconds would reveal to me their deepest insecurity, their gravest fear, their wildest ambitions, all of it, with the hope that in telling me that story, it would get back to a potential future president of the United States and have impacts for their family, for their community. So the level of candor and vulnerability people have with you is unlike anything I've ever experienced. And I'd done The Apprentice before. People may know who I was in some of these situations that I was going into, but they wouldn't have shared with me these things that you got the impression that oftentimes their own spouses wouldn't know, and they wouldn't do so within 30 seconds. So you learn so much about what motivates people, what drives people, what their concerns are, and you grow so much as a result of it.
So when you're in the White House, people, unlike in any other position, people have a sense that all the troubles they're going through, maybe you can help.
Yeah.
And so they put it all out there.
And they do so in such a raw, vulnerable, and real way. It's shocking and eye-opening and super motivating. I remember once I was in New Hampshire, and early on, right after my father had announced his candidacy, and a man walks up to me in the greeting line, and within around 5 seconds, he had started to tell me a story about how his daughter had died of an overdose, and how he was worried his son was also addicted to opioids. His daughter's friends, his son's friends, and it's heartbreaking. It's heartbreaking, and it's something that I would experience every day in talking with people.
And those stories just stay with you.
Always.
I took a long road trip around the United States in my 20s, and I'm kind of thinking of doing it again, just for like a couple of months, for that exact purpose. And you can get these stories when you go to like a bar in the middle of nowhere and just sit and talk to people, and they start sharing. And it reminds you of like how beautiful the country is. It reminds you of several things. One, that people, well, it shows you that there's a lot of different accents. That's for one. But aside from that, the people are struggling with all the same stuff.
Yeah.
And at least at that time, I wonder what it is now. But at that time, I don't remember. On the surface, there's like political divisions. There's Republicans and Democrats and so on. But like underneath it, people were all the same. The concerns were all the same. There's not that much of a division. Right now, the surface division has been amplified even more, maybe because of social media. I don't know why. So I would love to see what the country's like now, but I suspect probably it's still not as divided as it appears to be on the surface, what the media shows, what the social media shows. But what did you experience in terms of the division?
I think a couple reactions to what you just said. I think the first is when you connect with people like that, you are so inspired by their courage, in the face of adversity, and their resilience. And it's like a truly remarkable experience for me. The campaign lifted me out of a bubble I didn't even know I was in. I grew up on the Upper East Side of New York, and I felt like I was well-traveled and well-educated. And I believed at the time that I'd been exposed to divergent viewpoints. And I realized during the campaign how limited my exposure had been relative to what it was becoming. So there was a lot of growth in that as well. But I do think, you think about the vitriol in politics, and whether it's worse than it's been in the past or not. I think that's up for debate. I think, there have been duels, and there's been
Right.
screaming, and there's, politics has always been a blood sport, and it's always been incredibly vicious. I think in the toxic swirl of social media, it's more amplified, and there's more sort of democratization around participating in it, perhaps. And it seems like the voices are louder, but it feels like it's always been that. But I don't believe most people are like that. And you meet people along the way, and they're not leading with what their politics are. They're telling you about their hopes for themselves and their communities. And it makes you feel that we are a whole lot less divided than, the media and others would have us believe.
Although I have to say, having duels sounds pretty cool. Maybe I just romanticize Westerns. Anyway, all right. I miss Clint Eastwood movies. Okay. But it's true. Like, you read some of the stuff, like, in terms of what politics used to be in the history of the United States. Those folks went pretty rough, like way rougher, actually. But they didn't have social media, so they had to go, like, real hard. And the media was rough too. So all, like, the fake news, all of that's not recent. it's been nonstop. I look at the surface division, the surface bickering, and that might be like just a feature of democracy. It's not a bug of democracy. It's a feature. We're in a constant conflict, and it's the way we try to figure out the right way forward. So in the moment, it feels like people are just tearing each other apart, but really we're trying to find the way where, like, in the long arc of history, it will look like progress. But in the short term, it just sounds like people making stories up about each other and calling each other names and all this kind of stuff. But there's a purpose to it. I mean, that's what freedom looks like, I guess, is what I'm trying to say, and it's better than the alternative.
Well, I think that the vast majority of people aren't participating in it.
Sure. Yes, that's true also.
I think there's a minority of people that are doing most of the yelling and screaming.
Yeah.
And the majority of Americans just want to send their kid to a great school and want their communities to thrive, and want to be able to realize their dreams and aspirations. So I saw a lot more of that than it would feel obvious if you looked at, like, a Twitter feed.
Mm-hmm. What went into your decision to join the White House as an advisor?
The campaign, I never thought about joining. It was kind of like, get to the end of it. And when it started, I was like, everything in my life was almost firing on all cylinders. I had 2 young kids at home. During the course of the campaign, I ended up, I was pregnant with my third. So this young family, my businesses, real estate and fashion, and working alongside my brothers, running the Trump Hotel collection. And we had so many, my life was full and busy. And so there was a big part of me that was just wanted to get through, just get through it, without really thinking forward to what the implications were for me. But when my father won, he asked Jared and I to join him. And in asking that question, keep in mind he was a total outsider. So there was no bench of people as he would have today. He had never spent the night in Washington, D.C. before staying in the White House. And so when he asked us to join him, he trusted us. He trusted in our ability to execute. And there wasn't a part of me that could imagine the 70 or 80-year-old version of myself looking back and having been okay with having said no and going back to my life as I knew it before. I mean, in retrospect, I realized there is no life as you know it before, but just the idea of not saying yes, wherever that would lead me, and so I dove in. I was also, during the course of the campaign, I was just much more sensitive to the problems and experiences of Americans. I gave you an example before of the father in New Hampshire, but even just in my consumption of information, I had a business that was predominantly young women, many of which were thinking about having a kid, had just had a child, were planning on that life event. And I knew what they needed to be able to show up every day and realize this dream for themselves, and the support structures they would need to have in place. And I remember reading this article at the time in one of the major newspapers of a woman. She had a very solid job working at one of the blue chip accounting firms, and the recession came. She lost her job around the same time as her partner left her, and over a matter of months, she lost her home. So she wound up with her 2 young kids after bouncing around between neighbors, living in their car. She gets a call back from one of the many interviews she had done for a second interview where she was all but guaranteed the job should that go well. And she had arranged childcare for her 2 young children with a neighbor in her old apartment block. And the morning of the interview, she shows up and the neighbor doesn't answer the doorbell. And she stands there 5-10 minutes, doesn't answer. So she has a choice. Does she go to the interview with her children, or does she try to cancel? She gets in her car, drives to the interview, leaves her 2 children in the backseat of the car with the window cracked, goes into the interview and gets pulled out of the interview by police because somebody had called the cops after seeing her children in the backseat of the car. She gets thrown in jail. Her kids get taken from her. And she spends years fighting to regain custody. And I think about, that's an extreme example, but I think about something like that and I say, if I was the mother and we were homeless, would I have gone to that interview? And I probably would have. And that is not an acceptable situation, so you hear stories like that and then you get asked, will you come with me? And it's really hard to say no. I spent 4 years in Washington. I feel like I left it all in the field. I feel really good about it. And I feel really privileged to have been able to do what I did.
A chance to help many people. Saying no means you're kind of turning away from those people.
Felt like that to me.
Yeah, but then it's the turmoil of politics that you're getting into, and it really is a leap into the abyss.